Happy New Year. It's 2021 finally, right? Hey, we are really excited to be back with you again today. I'm Gail Farrell and this is Missy Grant, and we have the privilege of doing part 2 on our teaching for Mom to Mom on sibling relationships. Last month in December, we talked about sibling rivalry primarily. We kind of decided to divide the topic up into 2 different sections, the first one being sibling rivalry, and then the second one being sibling conflict. So they're definitely 2 standalone lessons, and yet they really piggyback on each other. And last month we laid a real foundation for the entire topic. So we just wanted to encourage you ladies, if you're at home watching and you haven't seen last month's teaching yet, why don't you pause this right now and go back and listen to that. That'll just help lay a foundation and just cause the entire topic to make more sense to you. And then come back and catch this this lesson today on that is more geared towards sibling conflict and resolving that. So just a quick recap on what we talked about last month. Not at all that will replace watching it, but just to kind of review a little bit that there is a difference between sibling rivalry and sibling conflict. But before even getting into that, we first laid a foundation from Scripture, the first passage being in Mark 12, where Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And then the second most important commandment after that is to love one another. And that we felt like is the primary foundation for any teaching in regard to family relationships, but particularly in regard to sibling relationships. And then along with that was the passage in Philippians 2, 3-4, which says, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. Right there, stop, right? Kids not being selfish, but do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. So those, then along with the one another's of Scripture, which there's 59 of them, so we certainly will not go over them all now, but those were the primary foundational scriptures that we felt are just key in regard to teaching unity and good relationships between our kids, which is what we're really hoping to do. So then to springboard off of that, there is a difference between sibling rivalry and sibling conflict. Rivalry often has more to do with the parent-child relationship and what's going on there. And it tends to be when a child perceives that he is either not loved as much as his siblings or is in danger of losing his parental love. So he's feeling insecure in the love of his parent and feeling like Johnny or Sally is loved more. And that's tragic often, obviously. So rivalry between kids is often triggered by how we as parents are handling situations, what the atmosphere that we're setting in the home. And then rivalry often stems from jealousy, competition, favoritism, and comparison. And then we springboarded off of those 4, gave some scriptural examples, which it's awesome how the Bible is so practical and gives us examples on so many areas that apply to daily life. But in regard to jealousy, we primarily said that in order to avoid jealousy between kids as much as possible, celebrate the uniqueness of each child and their accomplishments, and have the siblings do that as well. Encourage them when hard things come and when disappointments come. That would mean encouraging or even requiring a sibling to, a lot of the time, if not most of the time, go to another one's sporting event. We encourage each other in our home. We build each other up. We're there for each other. We wanted to, so then in regard to first jealousy, celebrating the uniqueness and accomplishments of each child. Secondly, unfair treatment between kids, particularly of parents treating children unfairly. That just needs to not happen.
And unequally, right?
Exactly, unequally, right? So, I mean, and if you feel like you're prone to that, or there's just one child that is harder for you to discipline or correct in what they might perceive as a fair way, then even give your spouse permission to make you aware of that and say, oh, in private, obviously, but I think you might need to redo, do a do-over on that one. That just seemed really unfair, the way, you handled that situation. But then even between our kids, not allowing them to treat one another unfairly either. And I loved Missy talked about building up or tearing down.
Yeah.
And that's something that we'll probably touch on again a little bit later.
Yeah.
We also talked about competition. There is just natural competition in a home and between siblings, and particularly if kids are closer in age, they tend to compete more with one another. So we said some competition can be good. It can teach us real life lessons. But you as a parent and as a parental team need to make decisions in advance of how much competition you're going to allow in your home. And really strive to keep it healthy rather than unhealthy.
Right, with their comfort level.
Exactly.
With that. It's going to be different. Your home may be different than my home.
Absolutely.
And our comfort levels with that. So.
Sure, right. And then again, we went into more detail on that last month. And then lastly, favoritism. 2 words basically, or 3 words, don't do it.
Yeah, it's hard.
Just stop, right? It's so damaging. It causes such resentment between kids. If they feel like there is favoritism taking place. So watch your words.
Yeah.
That would be what we'd want to wrap that up with.
And you talked last time too about perception.
Right.
And that's one of those areas where it may not be necessarily happening, but if it's their perception, right?
Right.
That you still have to address it.
Right. So, ladies, I just want to encourage you that sibling relationships are more than likely going to be the longest relationships that our kids will have with anyone in their life. I mean, think about it. You're born within 1 to 2 years of each other, and usually you are a part of one another's life for life.
Yeah.
Unless there's just a horrible separation, between siblings, you're a part of one another's lives for 70, 80 years or so. So we need to think carefully on that and help our kids steward that relationship. I mean, think about it, you with your siblings. What immediately comes to mind? Is it a positive thought, positive thoughts? Are they warm, or is it painful and hurtful and filled with damage and disappointment? We have the power and the responsibility to help our kids shape and mold those relationships that are going to be with them for life. And that's a big responsibility. So we just want to give you some tools to helpfully help you in that endeavor. Secondly, can we just encourage you to not be satisfied with siblings who only tolerate each other? Instead,
that's a good word, Gail.
Yeah. Instead, aim for a higher standard. We want them to like each other.
Yeah.
We want them to love each other. And I know when they're young and they want the same toy, and that's about the last thing on their minds, but that's our long-term goal as parents, as moms, is to set up a condition in our home that will help them foster positive feelings towards one another in the long run. And often the key to that is honor and respect. And we'll talk about that a little bit more this morning. And then, or this evening, whenever you're watching this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's morning for us right now.
Or in parts. So, yes, you get 5 minutes here and there.
Exactly. And then lastly, just to keep in mind that the way a sibling treats, or the way a child treats his sibling, is often the way he or she is going to treat his future spouse and or children. And that's a sobering thought.
That's a very sobering thought.
Right.
But it's a true word right there.
So again, we have a huge responsibility to help steward those relationships between our kids.
Exactly. And the only other thing that Gail and I had talked about within that as well is that children are gifts from the Lord. Mm-hmm. However that child has ended up in your family, whether it is a blended family or you're adopting or biological, whatever the situation is that they ended up there, it's a gift from the Lord. And scripturally, it's a gold star relationship. The Lord set that up. If you look in the book of Proverbs, he uses that sibling relationship in comparison a lot to things, of using that as a standard. It was really important to him, and because it's important to him, it's got to be important to us.
Absolutely.
And it's worth, I think the best way for us to say it, and that we've talked over and over about it, it's worth our time and our effort to steward those very specific relationships unto the Lord. He gave them to us to raise for him, and it's worth every amount of angst and loss of sleep and frustration we might have every now and then to continue stewarding those very important sibling relationships. And as Gail said, spot on, this is their long-term relationship. You're not always going to be there. Gail and I aren't always going to be there for our kids, but our kids are going to be there together for a long time. So just those words of wisdom and training them up is what we're looking at. Did you want to add anything to that before we start talking about conflict in specifically?
No, I think you said
Okay.
that well.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's jump into conflict resolution, which is what we've all been kind of looking forward to hitting. And just, Gail actually said this last time. I'm going to repeat it again. It's normal. It occurs in every setting of our lives. I don't care if it's work or school or our families or friendships. Conflict is a part of our broken, sinful world. And so learning how to do that and handle that in a positive way is really important tool to give to your kids. It's so important that in a couple months, here in Mom to Mom, we're actually having a counselor who's going to come in and speak at length on conflict resolution in marriage. So this is a really big topic and an important one to hit on. That scriptural reference again in Philippians about basically thinking better of others, than you do of yourself is foundational to that. Bringing them back to that point of always looking to others ahead of themselves. And then the other thing that the Lord had really been playing, at least with me on in this particular topic, is that we are called as Christians to unity, even in our diversity, right? Well, where does that start? It starts at a ground level relationship within our families, all right? So teaching your child and your children how to understand we're a family group, we're a team, but we are very diverse within that because God created us very differently. So we touched on that quite a bit last time, but just that uniqueness and understanding that. So those are some of the baseline parts of conflict resolution. The other big portion of scripture here, and this is a big portion that I want to read to you. Some of you are going to be very familiar with this, but I find it was important to me and is important to me in my walk with the Lord, as in my parenting and in relationship, and it's James 3:14 through 18. It is an expanded version of this, and it says this: "Who among you is wise and intelligent? Let him by his good conduct show his good deeds with the gentleness and humility of true wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be arrogant, and as a result, be in defiance of the truth. The superficial wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, secular, natural, unspiritual, even demonic." Are we not seeing that in our culture right now? Very heavy.
Absolutely.
"For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder, unrest, rebellion, and every evil thing and morally degrading practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, morally and spiritually undefiled, then peace-loving, courteous, considerate, gentle, reasonable, and willing to listen, full of compassion and good fruits. It is unwavering, without self-righteous hypocrisy and self-serving guile. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness, spiritual maturity, is sown in peace for those who make peace by actively encouraging goodwill between individuals." So that is a deep word for us and for you and for your children. All right?
I love that. Actively encouraging goodwill between individuals.
Yeah.
As opposed to just allowing jealousy and selfish ambition to exist, which was just a couple of verses up. Because without intervention, without Christ and his standards in a home, jealousy and selfish ambition are going to be the rule because of our sin nature. Yeah. And ladies, we understand that that's what we're striving to do, and to encourage you to do is to train out as much as possible the sin nature that naturally exists in our kids. So when your kids are at each other, it's not abnormal. It doesn't only happen in your home.
No, it doesn't.
It's their natural bend, but we're trying to help train and correct that out of them, so that the way that the end of that verse just read, so that we are actively encouraging goodwill between individuals. That's awesome.
And looking at conflict as a positive, as opposed to always being a negative, because the conflict is not necessarily going to go away, but how we respond to that, that is the big key right there.
So true.
That's really true. So then the other thing, along with in conflict resolution, that we want to take a look at is, what are we teaching? So one of the things you'll hear my kids say all the time, because I say it all the time to them, is you will have, particularly in marriage, you will have success, much more so in marriage or in any relationship, if you will learn to look at the situation through the other person's eyes.
So hard to do.
It's very hard to do.
But important.
But it's very, very, very important. So that's what we're doing here. When my kids were having conflict, I was always trying to work with them to try to look at it through the other person's eyes. We've had to deal with some things over the past couple of years that were pretty intense. I spent a lot of time on this. I hear you, but now sit in her chair. I hear you, now sit in Dad and Mai's chair. You know, so being able to look through that is something that we're really working towards. So give some thought to that.
And yet that's great, because you're acknowledging how they're feeling
Right.
and what they're saying, but how does it make him or her feel
Right.
also?
Exactly. Exactly. So it's one of those that if something is important to my husband, but it's not important to me, it's now important to me because it's important to my husband, and vice versa. And it's the same with your siblings. If it's important to your 4-year-old, then it needs to be important to your 7-year-old. And it's hard to teach them that, but that's what the back and forth is here. And then the other thing is, just remember that we've again touched on it before, but children learn by what they're observing.
Absolutely.
Right? From what they see and what they hear. So we asked you last month to do a little bit of heart check in the mirror. Before you go into trying to solve stuff, you and your husband, if there's some ongoing conflict between your kids, just make sure you've done that. Check to make sure you're not part of the problem. And if you're not, then let's just step right on down into problem solving. Do you want me to do that, or you want to jump in with anything else before I head into that?
I was going to jump in there,
Yeah,
but
good.
but I just wanted to even out on to what Missy just said, is that, ladies, as painful as it is, can we just assume that we probably are part of the problem?
Right.
I mean, it's probably not an if.
No.
It's not a, are you a part of the problem? It's look to see what might you be contributing to this.
That's a great way to
Because
say it.
our kids are mirrors of ourselves, as painful as that is. Often, I mean, they obviously mirror the other influences in their lives,
Sure.
what they're listening to, seeing on TV, how their friends are talking, et cetera, et cetera. But oftentimes it's what they're seeing in us that we may not have recognized in us yet.
Right, and don't we...
Darn, this parenting thing's hard.
And isn't it fun on the flip side of that, when we look at little kids and we'll say, oh my gosh, you are so much like your dad, and that is so funny and so cute and whatever. Or, oh man, I see your mom in you every single time. That's
So true.
wonderful. What's the flip side, right?
Absolutely, right. So in wanting less conflict in our homes, right? Don't we all want that? That means that we want it to be more peaceful in our homes. So in thinking through that and praying through that, I was thinking, okay, so we're striving to build a foundation. The Bible talks a lot about foundations, and Christ is the cornerstone. In Matthew 7, it talks about, are you laying a foundation of sand or of the rock in your marriage, in your home? And we need a solid foundation for peace in our homes. And I think where that begins is with some real clear house rules.
Sure.
So if you haven't already thought through those carefully, sit down with your husband and say, we need to come up with some house rules. If your kids are still real young, great. That's probably the easiest time to initiate those into your home and family. But don't lose heart, ladies. If your kids are a little older, you can always start now. And just sit down and have a family meeting and be honest and just say, you know what, kids? It hasn't been very fun at home lately, has
working.
it?
Right.
I mean, I don't think any of us are enjoying our home environment right now. Right. So we're going to make some changes, and it's going to be hard for all of us. But these are, and if your kids are old enough, mid to upper elementary school age or older, they might even be a part of setting some of those house rules.
Yeah.
But some to just start with, to get you thinking. Of course, you're going to tailor these to your own home and own family. And these are actually suggestions that James Dobson gives in his one chapter on dealing with sibling relationships, which I thought was excellent. It's only 10 pages. It's on your resource list that we handed out last month, and we're going to hand out again this month, and it's on the website. So if you're not attending in person, you can download those yourself. But he just talks about how important it is to develop a workable system of justice at home.
Right.
Just like we have laws in society to keep peace in society, we need to have rules or laws in our homes. So he just has a few that I thought were great. Never allow your kids to make fun of each other.
Right.
That's hard to enforce, is it not? But so important. Each child's room is his own private territory.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't have his own room, then make sure that they have some space, whether it's a shelf or a corner of the room or a dresser, whatever it might be. They need to have some space, some territory that's just for them.
And we're going to talk about that in one of the
Exactly.
questions too, because that has come up quite a bit.
Absolutely. Older children are not allowed to tease their younger siblings. And again, you're like, well, if I could enforce that, I mean, of course there'd be a lot less peace among our home. But that's what it takes, is setting the rule and then doing the work up front to enforce that. And there's consequences when that happens. And yeah, it's going to happen a lot because kids are kids and there's that sin nature. But older kids are not allowed to tease relentlessly and mercilessly their younger siblings. But next is younger siblings are not allowed to harass their older siblings. They're not allowed to go in and ruin their Lego collection or, do whatever it might be that just absolutely frustrates that older sibling to death. So you have to have some ground rules. Kids are allowed to have some alone time.
Yeah.
And we're going to touch on that during the question time as
Yeah.
well. But whether it's just, they just want to be alone, they need some space. And again, ladies, we've said it over and over, but you need to know your children.
Right.
And some kids require that a lot more than others. And if that's how Johnny is, let Johnny have that.
Yeah.
He's going to be so much healthier as a person and have a much healthier relationship than with his siblings if he's had that alone time.
And if you remember the whys of why you're doing all this, it makes it a lot easier to implement. You don't become so overwhelmed by constantly having to try and follow something. When you remember the whys, it helps.
Absolutely, right. And then lastly, another ground rule that you might want to consider is that parents do mediate genuine conflicts. Now, that doesn't mean that we aren't in the process of teaching and training our kids to try to work things out between themselves. But when there's a genuine conflict, that especially if physical harm is involved or just meanness is involved, then parents need to be willing to intervene and show impartiality and fairness in how that situation is resolved. Bottom line is, those may not be the ground rules that you set up at your home. Bottom line, though, is develop some clear house rules. And ladies, it's hard. We get it. It requires work up front. But if you're willing to do the hard work and let those kids know that this is a hard and fast rule and there will be consequences when it's violated, then just like with discipline, they're going to push the boundaries less and less if they know you really mean it and you're really going to enforce it. And that'll mean less conflict eventually.
Right.
But it takes some blood, sweat, and tears to get there. But can we just encourage you, do the hard work? I mean, no one ever said parenting is easy, and it's not. It's not, and it's exhausting, and we understand that. And we know you're so tired, and this is like what you don't want to hear. But doing the hard work up front will make it easier to where you can relax a little bit more in the end, and as time goes on and as the kids learn the ground rules. So develop house rules. And then can I just encourage you that basically all of the one another's, the scripture that talks about not being so selfish, thinking of others first, again, that's so against our sin nature. But basically what we're talking about there is showing honor and respect.
That's right.
That's what we want our kids to do, A, with us, and then be with their siblings, because that's going to make for a more peaceful environment. But ladies, what has to take place before we can require honor? It's that we have to give honor. So how are you treating, talking to, dealing with your children?
Right.
Are you showing them honor, even in the way in which you discipline or you intervene? Or are you condescending and negative and critical and comparing and doing all those things that we in our heart know we shouldn't be doing, but man, we're having a hard time having the self-control to not treat them that way?
And here's the hard application of that. If I sat down with your teenagers and I said, okay, does your mom and dad, do they honor you in how you deal with conflict that you might be putting in front of them at the moment?
Mm-hmm.
What would they say? What would they say? Because that teenage time, I happen to think it's a great time. Some
Mm-hmm.
people don't as much, but I think it's wonderful, and I think culture has given it a really bad rap. But it comes along of how they're perceiving your responding to them. So
Absolutely.
just give it a thought.
Absolutely, yeah. So Colossians 3:21 just sums that up so perfectly. I think it actually says fathers. I think maybe sometimes perhaps because dads don't quite have the nurturing, as much innate nurturing and maybe sensitivity as what many women do. But I think we could very accurately change that to say parents, do not exasperate your children. That word exasperate there means provoke them to anger. So parents, don't exasperate your children that they may not lose heart. Losing heart is tragic. What does that look like? That's a sense of just giving up. Why should I keep trying? It's so unfair. It's so unjust. Losing hope, frustration, anger. If you're seeing a lot of frustration and anger in a child, perhaps they're feeling extremely exasperated by the way they're being treated, even by their parents. And again, ladies, it comes back to knowing an individual child.
Yeah.
Some kids
Yeah.
are so sensitive, it just takes a look.
A look, yeah, not even a word,
And
just a look.
other kids are so strong-willed that we really have to be on them in order to help them train and correct that behavior. But it comes down to knowing your kids. So house rules, giving honor, are both just important issues.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. All right, let's jump right into problem solving. It really doesn't matter, as we said earlier, what situation you're problem solving. It all really comes, it's kind of the same process. So I think a lot of you already have problem solving steps that you do, but we're going to talk through a couple of those, and then we're going to jump right into some questions that you guys have sent in. Just know that the foundational answer to a lot of what Gail and I are going to answer, the specifics, is age and stage. All right? Age and you're going to hear us say it over and over and over again, because age and stage of your kids have a lot to do with how you're going to problem solve conflict. All right? So just keep that in the forefront. So what is the first thing you need to do in problem solving is you have to ID the problem. You actually have to be able to identify what it is. So the gals were laughing at me a little bit because I was saying, I'll get gals saying things to me like, I swear my kids are at each other all the time. I'm up to here with it. I can't deal with it anymore. And I will ask
Especially after Christmas break, right?
And I'll ask a very simple question that people laugh at, and I'll say, so what are they fighting about? And then I always get, because they're kids, because they're boys, because they've been together too much, whatever. I'm like, no. What are they actually fighting about? Do you know? Let's find that out before we start adding other layers to it. So ID the actual problem, right? If you're in a work situation and something comes up, you have to ID what the actual problem is before you can hit the solutions. Get to the root of it, all right? You have to get to the root of it. You hear the terms peacekeeping and peacemaking, okay? In Scripture, we want to be peacemakers. That's long term, right? That's the whole story of if somebody is needing food, you can give a man a fish, it'll feed him for the day, but if you teach him to fish, he'll be able to eat for a lifetime. That's the difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is putting a Band-Aid on it, solving it for the moment, but not getting down to the root of it and really figuring out what's going on here. When we're tired, when we've heard the same complaint, the same fight, the same raised voices over and over, we have a tendency just to jump in and that's actually not going to solve it. All right, and then just identify what the solutions are. There are going to be short-term solutions to what's happening, and there are going to be long-term solutions. And you may need to have some sit-down conversations, and we're going to give the specifics of those with the child or children individually to figure out what's going on and try to come up with a solution, and lots of times include them in the solution. So just those are the real quick things. ID the problem, get to the root of it, and then come up with solutions within that.
So for a quick example, your kids are screaming at each other, and one's yelling at the other one, and the other one is saying, well, it's mine, I had it first, or whatever it might be. Our tendency is to just jump in there and say, okay, so who had it first? Who took it away from each other? Why does this keep happening all the time? Da-da-da-da-da-da. I think what Missy's saying is, let's take a minute and say, okay, you know, did you take that toy from your brother? Yes. Well, why?
Yeah.
Because he just used it to crash into the Lego creation that I've been working on for the last 3 weeks.
Right.
So there's a lot more there than just, you know, did you rip that out of his hands? Now, was that the right way to respond? Probably not. We would want to start with words first and all of those kinds of things. But that utter frustration of the one child intentionally damaging something of the other sibling, now that needs to be addressed. That intentional desire to aggravate, harm, destroy.
Yeah.
More so than just, who had that first?
Right.
So
Right.
that's what you mean by IDing the problem,
That's right. That's right. You just, we want to be responders, not reactors. You will hear that over and over and over. You want to respond to the situation. If you respond, there will be long-term effects with that. If you react, there'll be short-term, and it's not good for anybody. And I heard Andy Stanley actually say recently, everything that he's never had to apologize for a response. He's always had to respond or to apologize when he's reacted. So he's never apologized when he's had responded because he's given it thought, but when he's reacted, he almost always has had to come back. Okay, so I just think that was a really good word to keep in mind.
Definitely, but we get it, ladies. It's so hard
totally
not to respond, or excuse me, not to react in the moment.
Yes, right. And you might have a bend toward that. I've always been a responder, so this hasn't been as tough for me. My sister was always more of a reactor. So we've both come more to the center as we've gotten older in life. She definitely she responds exceptionally well at this point in her life. You know, so just know your bend on that.
Good.
All right, so we're going to jump through some questions here that were given to us. We know on Thursday we're doing this live, but for those who either can't be there on Thursday or our other Zoom groups, we're doing it this way. So we're both going to respond, but we're going to ask each other questions and then just kind of fill in around each other. If you have more questions beyond what we talked to, would you please talk to your mentor moms? They will get those to us so that we can respond to you or the leadership group to respond to you, okay? So don't forget that. All right. Here's one that came in. It says, so I'm going to ask Gail, how do you know, because you were already talking about this, refereeing, how do you know when to step in and when to let them work it out, right? That's all that Gail was already talking about that. So we're just going to
That's a great question. So I think we do want to encourage our kids to be able to try and work out their own conflicts initially. But is it violating, I'd say first and foremost, is anybody's physical well-being in jeopardy?
Yeah.
So if there's harm being done, and that was probably the primary ground rule that I would have said was first and foremost in our home, is that there's no physical hurting or harming of your siblings. And there is quick and swift repercussions when that happens, especially when they're young. So that's just not allowed. But so how do you know when to step in? If there's no physical harm, nobody's life is in peril or in jeopardy, and if the age and stage of the kids is fairly similar. If there's a big age difference, you just have to know that the thought processes, the bodily control of a younger child differs wildly from that of an older sibling. 3-4 years makes a big difference. So if it's just such a big gap that you just know it's not going to work between the two of them, but if it's something to where you're encouraging them to use words to speak it out, to work it out, it seems like they're able to do that. Of course, it takes training to get them to that point. But, well, why did you just grab that from me? I was trying to play with that. Well, you've had it for the last 20 minutes, and I've been asking you for it. Maybe you can let them begin to deal with those kinds of situations. But, yeah.
Yeah, I would add into that that you're not a referee. God did not create you and your husband to be referees. And so your children will constantly put you in a position to referee, right? They're doing that because they think they're going to get the better end of that deal all the time. But the reality is you don't want to be the referee. So you need to work towards what Gail just said, where they can use their words and try to work it out. I told you the story before where my kids were taught that. We had a neighbor who didn't think so much of that, so he would call her a snitch all the time when she would try to work something out, and if it didn't work out, they were to go get an adult. It may be me, but it might be someone else's mom or dad. I happen to think that's a really positive way to deal with something, because some things just need an adult to step into it. So if you're at home, this is what I would say. If your kids are outside playing, and you're doing something there in the kitchen, your window should be open a little bit, and your eyes should be watching what's going on while you're doing whatever and listening, because you can hear when something escalates, you can hear the tone, you can hear the words. And this is a lot of what I would do is I would step out to the door or whatever, and I wouldn't walk into the situation. I would ask, hey, do you need some help in this? As opposed to inserting myself into it, I would see what their response is. All right? Age and stage is a big part of that. If you're dealing with 2 3-year-olds, totally different thing. You're probably going to have to walk over and help them with that. But again, if you're dealing with the 3-year-old and the 7-year-old, or you're dealing with the 10, 12, 14-year-old, they should be able to work through that. And if it's not working, then they should have that right to be able to come to you and speak to you. But you got to be paying attention. But don't automatically insert yourself into it, because then you're refereeing. All right?
I like that, because you're asking them the question. That gives them some power in the situation. It gives them an opportunity to make a decision, but it also gives the underdog. If there's one child who just always gets trampled, then they have the opportunity to say, yeah, I need some help here. The older kid, or
as they're sitting under 2 larger siblings who are sitting on top of them.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, and sometimes it's the younger one who's extremely strong-willed and just is relentless on making that older sibling miserable. But if either one of them says, yeah, we need some help, then I'm assuming
that's your job.
Yeah,
because you're the parent. So that is your job. But it's different than refereeing. Okay? We see the difference?
Right. I really like that. Good. Okay. So next question. What do you do? And I'm going to ask, Missy, to start with this one. What do you do when they are intentionally antagonizing each other? What can you do beyond maybe just sending them to their room?
Okay. And Gail and I have talked about this one. Age and stage. Okay. Age and stage is a big part of this, because I bet I can ask, for those of you who have younger kids, you can raise your hands and say, you get the little ones antagonizing the older one is usually the direction it happens, right? And again, stepping into that is being aware of that. Why is that little one constantly doing that? And do not give me the answer because he's a boy, or because he's a girl, or because he's more aggressive. No, that's not actually what's happening here. Lots of times it's because that little one wants that older one's attention. So some of the things you may have to do with that is talk to that older one and say, hey, can you give him 15 minutes right now, and then I will clear him out of your path and out of your way, but he's needing you. And so can you guys do something together, or suggest what they can do together, and work with that and try, again, that's giving the older one to see the younger one through the younger one's eyes. But my experience has been most of the time that's why they're antagonizing. other antagonizing could be, are they tired? Are they hungry? Are they?
Absolutely.
And that goes through the all age and stage spectrum. We're going to talk about that a little later, but after you've kind of determined that, no, they don't need a nap, no, they just had lunch, then it's probably something else. So work with the older siblings to understand that, but also be willing to say, I'm going to let those olders be fine, and I am going to come in and redirect and do something with the little one. If it is happening when they're older, like 5, 7, 9, 10, 12, then there will be consequences with that, because they're old enough to understand that we don't do that, and conversation with them, but there will be consequence with that. One of the parts of that was beyond sending them to their room. I have to be honest with you. I just, true confession, my kids will tell you, I didn't send my kids to their room.
I didn't much either.
And it's not that they didn't get in trouble or whatever, but I wanted their room actually to be a really safe place for them.
A positive place.
A positive place for them. And so let me say it this way. I've coached a lot of years. I never use running or running sprints as a discipline. Didn't matter whether I was doing basketball or soccer. I didn't use that as a discipline to them, because they were running sports and I wanted them to enjoy running. So if they put a negative on it, then they looked at it differently when they're actually doing a running sport. Okay, so I would just say that with the antagonizing age and stage.
So, ladies, there was a lot of wisdom packed into that response just then, because she was allowing the children to be a part of the process.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long ways towards not doing what Colossians 3 was talking about when it said, do not exasperate your children. So if the younger child was antagonizing the sibling, and it's so much easier to just say, could you just play with him for a while? I mean, he's been alone all morning or all day while you guys were at school. He just wants to hang out with you. Just play with him.
Yeah.
How frustrating and how unjust to that older child who's been in school. Don't you wish?
Dealing with all their stuff.
Yeah, in theory, if it weren't COVID.
Right.
But yeah, and just looking forward to some space and some free time. And now they're being forced to play with the younger sibling for an indefinite period of time, as opposed to including him in the solution. Could you come alongside me? Your younger sister just needs some time and attention from you.
Right.
Let's show her honor. Let's prefer her by you spending, I'll set a timer, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe it's even 5 minutes, depending on how much time is left in the afternoon. And then I will honor you by allowing you to have some space and do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that what we do with our spouses? Some spouses, when they come home from work, they need a little bit of downtime, right? So we protect that from them for a little bit. It's the same, it's just an older version of that. Gail talked about house rules. Do you remember what my 3 were last time? No teasing, no name calling, no hitting. Bottom line, immediate response. So this question comes from that. You say hitting and physical confrontations weren't allowed. I think most families have that rule, but what do you do when it happens? I've yet to find a consequence severe enough to deter that behavior. I'm going to ask Gail to talk to that one first, because we've actually talked a lot about this one.
Okay, so again, I would say the same thing, no hitting. And we've had a lot of gals say, but I have mostly boys or all boys, and that's just how boys are. Boys are physical.
Yeah.
Boys can be aggressive. Some girls can be as well, so let's not make it just about gender. But that doesn't just automatically mean that we let things slide and that things are slack.
Yeah.
I think if you were to talk to men who grew up in a home with all boys, and if they said that it was pretty much free reign, that they were wailing on each other all the time, they might have thought that was normal, but I'm guessing that they have some pretty bad memories and probably some pretty deep resentments against the 1 or 2 siblings who really tended to just be mean.
I'd agree.
So again, I would say that that's an important point. Now, I loved it last month in our individual discussion group time after our session last month when we were in person. A couple of gals in our group mustered up the courage, and I just loved their transparency to say, okay, I'm sure it was like probably my greatest parenting flaw ever, but I've actually encouraged one of my kids to hit their sibling. to hit back because one sibling always wails on and takes advantage of the other. And we understand what you're saying. She was trying to teach them, learn how to stand up for yourself, don't let yourself be the underdog all the time, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Missy and I would just both agree we have to have a safe environment at home.
Yeah.
Ladies, that's the basis for this.
Right.
Home needs to be a safe place and safe space. It's a refuge from the world. You've heard me say that over and over and over because I believe it to be so important. So just a ground rule of no hitting, no physical confrontations. That's different than wrestling.
Yeah.
And then just messing around. I would never say, don't say you can't touch one another. That's the lazy way out. But as
Right.
long as both kids are enjoying it, if it's wrestling, then it's allowable. But once it changes, once one person is angry or once one person is clearly not enjoying it, then we need to bring it to a stop. So how do you do that? If you start when they're young, it's going to be much easier. If that's just a hard and fast, there is an immediate consequence for that, and they know that, then they're not going to be as inclined to do it when they're older. If it's taking place when they're older, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
We're going to remove them from the situation for one thing. But yeah, what do you do? What is a consequence that is severe enough?
Yeah.
What do you say?
Well, I think the first part of that, though, is IDing the problem. So when you say, the hitting is still happening, is that happening out of fun or is that happening out of anger?
Right.
So if there's an anger issue with a child, that's how they respond to everything, and their only way to get that out is to physically hit somebody. That is a problem, all right? You've got to stop and address what the anger issue is there. If you can't get to the bottom line of that by yourself, then you and your husband need to get some counseling with that child to figure out what is going on. That will escalate, all right? And I know some of you struggle with this because you've spoken to us. So that would be foundational for sure, is take a look what that bottom line anger is there, and finding out, why is she so angry? Why is he so angry? And then you can try to formulate a plan to deal with that. When it comes to consequences, I'm just going to tell you right now, you're right. There really isn't a consequence that's probably going to deter anybody, because if they're getting enough juice out of that, it's like a drug addiction. If they're getting some juice out of that, they could care less what you do to them, because them thumping their brother when they walk by, so what? Do whatever you want, Mom, but that felt good. All right. Well, okay. So that's a problem right there. When they're older, obviously loss of privilege is the biggest one. And depending on the situation this is happening in, if it's happening at the home, that's one thing. If it's happening in the school ground or with friends elsewhere, that's a significant, you're done, you're home, you don't get to do that anymore for a while. There's a loss of activity and a loss of privilege.
And that works when they're younger.
Well, it does when they're young as well.
Right.
But get down to what
Correct.
the anger thing
Right.
is. If you have somebody, swinging a golf club at somebody, that's dangerous. You need to figure out what's going on.
Right.
And it's not just the fact that he's swinging the golf club at his sister. There's a reason he's doing that. Is it a reaction that he's getting that's unhealthy, or is there an anger issue?
Right.
So that's what I would say to that one. How do you change the mood or dynamic in the home when everyone is just at each other's throat?
All right. So I would say, let's
I
get
know
out
I
and
flipped
do
these, but
something.
I'm going to ask you that
Sure,
first.
yeah. Try to change the environment. I mean, getting outside, just sometimes things when you're in the house, and ladies, we know you've been in the house a lot with COVID, and that's a huge issue right now. Molehills become mountains, don't they? Something that really in the scope of things is small becomes really big when that's our whole world and our whole space. So get out, go on a hike. Try to find, go to where you live close enough to the coast. Get away if you can. If everybody enjoys a game, play a game. Just something to change that environment.
Right. And the other part of that one too, I was telling Emma this the other night. You know what's great about being mom? You get to do that. You get to set that and change that and do that. So do that. Get outside. Gail and I have talked a lot that our kids were outdoor kids. I got them outside all the time for this purpose. But if everyone's having a terrible, horrible, really bad time, and that's over time that this continue to happen, then you know what? Come home, let everyone take a bath, pile on the couch, eat dinner at the couch, watch a movie, change it up. Just change the routine up and try to create just a different sense of feel in the air. Seriously.
Sure. Change the vibe.
And change the vibe as best you can, whatever that might look like for you and your family. I know that seems kind of a generic answer, but that's really that's what I would do. I would just take a look at what was going on and try to, and with a hand raised that you all are dealing with a time frame that we did not have to deal with the pandemic and being closed in. So
sure.
I want to ask Gail about this because she touched about this earlier. Possessiveness of stuff was a question, and not wanting to share. Do I give them consequences for choosing not to share their things? I feel like one child chooses not to share, then that makes the other sibling angry and then wants to stop sharing his or her things. And then the cycle continues, but it doesn't feel right to have to convince the sharing to happen all the time. I ultimately want it to be their choice. What are your thoughts with that?
Sure. So I think that it's important to let our kids have not only their own space, or at least some territory that's theirs if they don't have their own room, but also some possessions that are just theirs. They belong to them.
Yep.
It's special. It gives them the pride of ownership. It teaches them to value things. So no, I don't think everything should have to always be shared. But that being said, obviously, we don't all have unlimited budgets, so we can't buy, 2 or 3 or 4, however many kids are in your family, 4 sets of Legos or 3 sets of whatever it might be. So some things just have to be known that this is community property.
Right.
These toys belong to all of you, and we will work that out. You might ask for permission to use a toy just by yourself for a while. Again, I think that should be okay.
Yeah.
They're individuals. They need to be able to express their individuality. True, we want to be training their heart, though, towards sharing. We get that. You don't want to always force it, but allowing them to have some things of their own might go a long ways towards helping them share some of the other things.
Right, and ultimately sharing is about stewardship. And as I shared with the gal who sent this in, this has actually nothing to do with siblings. You could have one child, and teaching them that what we have is to benefit others, but that doesn't mean they don't have their own things as well. And the big issue with that is being able to say yes or no to that being shared, right? So the child, I did it so that that child could say yes, she can play with it, or no, she can't, and I honored their yes or no. However, the teaching point for us was to get, if I didn't agree with their no, the way I would ask it was, okay, so just tell me, what are you thinking with that? Why was the no? Because I'm trying to teach them to think through why they're saying what they're doing. Not just because, no, I don't like them, I don't want them touching it, that's not gonna fly. But if they're part of the solution, but I honor what they say, what I may say to them is, okay, I hear you. Next time I want you to think about this a little bit and add that piece into it. It's all part of building up their decision making, and they're looking at things from a little bit bigger perspective.
And what Missy had actually, we talked about this earlier, what she said to me is that what she'll often say is, okay, you don't have to share that with your sister.
Right.
But let's think about that. You don't even have to give me an answer, but is that being selfish or is that being selfless?
Right.
And I thought, oof, that's good. It's just they're having to do a little bit of a heart check.
Yeah.
But what I really like about allowing them to have a say in the matter, which we both agree on, is that, again, it's empowering. So I think our kids need to feel like they're in control of some things. That goes a long ways towards them not being exasperated, but it's also teaching them problem solving, because yes or no, am I going to allow this or not? But if not, why not? And I'm probably going to be required, if not to give an answer on that, to at least think about it or be encouraged to think about it. So all that's going to start going through their mind before they say yes and no after a while.
And then the one more part of that is if they say, no, I don't want that sibling to play with it, and you say, well, too bad, I'm giving it to them anyway. you just did significant damage there.
Oh,
so that
absolutely.
you definitely don't want to go down that line. Gals, we're running up against some time,
Right.
but there's some things that I want Gail to talk to, and it has to do with strong-willed child and maybe a little more meek child in personality. And there's some great things that she's done, and just some rereading that she's done recently I want her to share with you, and then she's going to close us up as well.
Right, so yeah, this has gone a little long, and we apologize for that. Hopefully you've been able to watch it in some snippets. But
Yeah.
the great question was, what do you do when you have a more strong-willed child and then one that's more passive and compliant? And it's so easy, ladies, for the strong-willed child to wear us down. And that old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, can often be true in parenting, and yet with great consequence to that more compliant, quieter, more reserved, maybe more easygoing child. So again, in Dobson's book, in just that one 10-page chapter on sibling relationships, I found some information that I just thought was so good. It was such a good refresher, like Missy said, that strong-willed kids tend to get away with more because they simply never give up, and their parents become exasperated just trying to hang in there. Is that happening in your home? If there's a job that's less pleasant, do you automatically ask the more compliant child to do it just because you don't want to put up with what you know your stronger-willed child's response is going to be? However, the compliant child can easily be underestimated, ignored, exploited, or shortchanged. It's not unusual for parents to take their cooperative child for granted. If there's an unpleasant job to be done, he's often expected to do it. The consequences, though, of such inequity, again, that's that unfair treatment that we
Right.
talked about earlier, should be obvious, even though the compliant child goes along with the program most all the time and doesn't complain. He may accumulate a volume of resentment through the years. And it's just a known fact among psychologists that compliant people tend to hold their feelings inside, but they are capable of harboring great resentment. And then a couple of case studies were given of people as adults who had written in saying, I still struggle with resenting my sibling because I was always made to give in. He was so difficult, so challenging. And so mom and dad were so unfair.
Yeah.
They made me suck it up and get the short end of the stick. And again, ladies, it's because that's the easy way out.
Yeah.
But we're doing great damage to that compliant child and damaging that sibling relationship that we're trying to foster, being a great lifelong relationship. So can we just encourage you, stand up for that compliant child.
Yeah.
Don't let the strong-willed child always win, always get their way, always get the easy way out, just because it's going to be a battle.
Yeah.
Be willing to battle.
Yeah, be their advocate.
Absolutely.
And we talked about I will always tell you, don't train that strong-willedness out of a child. Train it up.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's the same with someone who might be a little more meek in how they present. Train that up. That's how God made them. Don't train it out. That doesn't mean there isn't other parts of their personality you need to work towards. This one needs to learn grace. This one needs to learn to be a little more verbal. But train those up. Don't train it out of them, but be an advocate there.
Right. Right. We're breaking their will at times, but not their spirit.
That's
we
right.
don't want to break their spirit.
No.
Yeah,
No.
so important. So a couple of principles in wrapping up. I think there's two great takeaways that can just almost sum everything up, and questions to ask ourselves and even to ask our kids. And these both come from Missy. I want to give credit where credit is due. But she said she often just said to her kids, are those words building up or are they tearing down?
Right.
That's easy. That's easy to remember, ladies. That's easy to say. That's easy to get our kids thinking in that direction. Is that building up or is that tearing down? And then secondly, are we being selfless or are we being selfish?
Right.
I just think that's so good. A lot of other things that we've said is wanting to empower our kids, bringing them in along in the problem-solving process. That goes a long ways towards avoiding the exasperation and the frustration that kids often feel when things just seem so unjust.
Right.
And then I mentioned it last month, but I'm going to mention it again. This is
one.
a great little
Find
book.
this.
It's called, I actually bought it used on Amazon in very good condition. I think it was $5 with shipping.
Wow.
It's called Siblings. You're stuck with each other, so stick together. Again, I don't believe this is written from a Christian perspective, and yet I felt like it was packed full of really great nuggets. You could read this together as a family. Let me rephrase that. I strongly encourage you to read this together as a family. It could be at the dinner table. It's written. There's great pictures. It's catchy. It's attractive. I mean, you could even buy a couple of different copies and have your kids read it and then come back and discuss as a family, or just read a couple of pages at the table each night and then talk about it. But it's written to kids, so it's super easy to understand, but has great concepts in it, and it plants in their thought, hey, you're gonna have this brother or this sister for a long time, so why not make the most of it?
Right.
Why not learn to get along and enjoy each other instead of hating each other's guts now and later?
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah,
Amen.
absolutely.
So hopefully, gals, all that you've heard the past 2 months will be encouragement to you. Again, if you have questions, please reach out, and we would love to answer them or sit down and talk with you. It's what we do. We love it. It's a joy to us. So anyway, we love you. Enjoy your January, and we will be back in February.
Absolutely. And hang in there. We know it's
Yeah.
tough, ladies. We know dealing with our kids, especially during COVID, is so tough, but it is worth the effort and the energy and the time that you put into it. But like Missy said, we love you. We're praying for you. Good luck.